House of the Dragon has a bit of a Goldilocks problem. Some of it is woefully half-baked, some of it is grossly over-baked, and some of it inexplicably turns out just right. Why are some characters and plotlines so infuriating to watch, and why are others just home runs, and then why are a bunch of them just meh? The writers of House of the Dragon have a problem with action. Not just action scenes, that's a symptom of this larger issue. They have a problem with actions, like people doing stuff and stuff happening. This is because after 3 seasons, it's pretty clear what their priority is. They prefer to focus on the psychology of their characters, their minds and emotions, rather than the events happening within the story. And for a show that's going for epic but grounded fantasy, that's kind of a fatal mistake to make. I'm the Elflander, let me explain. This show is so bizarre to watch because after 3 seasons, it feels as if it's still finding its footing, and yet it's really entertaining and sometimes very compelling and very moving. A lot of this comes down to the great performances and the incredible work of the crew, as well as, sometimes the writing. The problem isn't quality, but consistent quality. The highs are sky high. The show has what it takes to be great all the time, just like the first 4 seasons of its mother show, Game of Thrones. But it's this psychology problem that holds it back. Let's look at what Ryan Condal, showrunner, has said about one of the key trios at the heart of Hot D Season 3, Queen Rhaenyra, her husband Prince Daemon, and her spymaster Mysaria. Daemon is meant to be the devil on Rhaenyra's shoulder. He's a bloodthirsty, white-hair supremacist warmonger. Mysaria is always looking out for the little guy. She's meant to be the angel, and they're at war for her soul, just like the realm is at war for the throne. This is a very psychological, meta view of the characters' roles, and if you watch all of their scenes with this in mind, it becomes so obvious that that is the driving force of every interaction that any or all of these characters share. But if that's the case, Mysaria being good and Daemon being evil, why does basically everybody prefer to see Daemon at work, and why is Mysaria indisputably the least popular character on the show? Accents aside, it's because Daemon has a character outside of Rhaenyra's head, and Mysaria doesn't. Mysaria is an extension of Rhaenyra's psychology. She's the light side, the side that harkens back to Viserys from Season 1. Daemon does stuff connected to the plot, not just the themes. It's so funny when Condal says that he's frustrated by how much people like Daemon. It's evidence for how disconnected he is from what makes his own show work, when it does work. And it gets funnier every season how they keep writing situations where Daemon is obviously correct, but the writers insist that he's somehow the bad guy. I think the way that the writers approach Hot D, whether consciously or subconsciously, is by starting with the question, what would be the most interesting thing to psychoanalyze this season? And then they build the rest of the season from there, everything from dialogue to plot to action scenes. They want a character study in a fantasy setting. In fairness to them, that was part of the appeal of Game of Thrones in the first place. Realism, not just in terms of being dark and gritty, but by doing psychoanalysis on its characters. But the way that House of the Dragon does it is by putting the cart before the horse, and therefore disconnecting the writers from the stuff that's actually going on. Let's take Rhaenyra as just a case study, although we'll get into more examples soon, believe me. It's very obvious that her character arc for this season was pitched something to the effect of the stress and the cost of power. That sounds okay, but what if it instead was approached as Rhaenyra seizes King's Landing and begins to assert her dominance? Things don't go as planned. Notice how our first pitch focuses in on a theme, and the second is about events, stuff happening. Why is the second one better? Well, what early Game of Thrones understood is the same lesson that tentpole fantasy properties like Lord of the Rings and the OG Star Wars trilogies understood. That the secret sauce to fantasy isn't magic or monsters, but historicity, the sense that what you're watching is a fictional history unfolding. Historical events, and events with what Tolkien would describe as the inner consistency of reality. This is the meat of any story that's meant to be dealing with civilization or society on some level. And the key to historicity is stuff happening. The plot must be about events, building up to events, experiencing events, cooling down from them, repeat. Our characters, then, are fictional historical figures, people playing roles in these events, whether they're active or passive. And writers have to carefully choose which of these characters to focus on to give us the most interesting view of the plot. House of the Dragon is supposed to be about a massive civil war, this apocalyptic, dynastic, semi-magical feud. But if that's the meat of the story, Who likes bland, unseasoned protein? This is where the character stuff has to enter. The points of view that we follow all interact with the events differently because of their motivations, their histories, their beliefs, their virtues, and their vices. Because of their interaction with events, we learn about them, why they act the way that they do, why they make certain choices, and therefore themes get revealed. Just looking at Season 1 of Game of Thrones, it's a masterpiece in this regard. From the very beginning, characters are confronted with stuff happening. Leaving Winterfell inspires vastly different reactions from all the characters who are leaving and all the ones staying. The show builds the psychological and/or spiritual journeys of each character by grounding them in these events. You learn about Ned's honor, or Tyrion's cunning, or Daenerys' sense of justice by watching them in different situations and seeing how they react. Yes, stuff like the Red Wedding happens to demonstrate a theme, that just because Robb Stark is a good guy, he's not destined to win just because he's good. The point is made successfully because it's built on a foundation of stuff happening. Robb is at war, Robb makes oaths, Robb breaks oaths, and then he pays the price. Why he made and broke those oaths is revealed or developed as stuff happens. Why this works is that it's true to life. This is how we actually experience the world. Stuff happens and we interact with it in whichever way we do based on who we are and what we're carrying with us. We can derive lessons or themes from all these things, but it always comes down to stuff that happened, stuff happening, or stuff that has not yet come to pass. House of the Dragon so often wants to reach that top point, that theme, the result, without fully grounding itself in what has to happen to reveal that theme. Now, the psychological approach that they take works out sometimes. Whenever there's a scene of intense emotion like grief, or an episode like Rhaenyra Triumphant this past season, we're doing a psychoanalytical deep dive works from a story perspective, and when they do it well, it's incredible. Certain arcs, like Aegon's, greatly benefit from this kind of handling, but it's still a shaky foundation, and all of the stuff that the show messes up is evidence of this. It only works inadvertently. What the event-driven approach needs to generate this sense of historicity is a well-thought-out story on the purely in-universe level, which means sound world-building, logical plot progression, realistically realized characters. In theory, you should be able to describe a character arc purely in terms of stuff happening. Let's look at Jaime Lannister in Season 3. Jaime is being escorted to King's Landing by Brienne on the orders of Catelyn Stark. He's too weak from his imprisonment last season for his escape attempts to really work, but he and Brienne get captured by Locke's band on the orders of Roose Bolton. He steps in to protect Brienne and so gets his hand chopped off. He grows weaker from their captor's abuse until they're brought to Roose. He recovers somewhat and makes a deal for his own release, but before he makes it all the way home, he goes back to retrieve Brienne, and he brings her in honor to the capital. Notice how the central points of Jaime's arc aren't there. His confession about his famous king slaying and his unlikely dynamic with Brienne. But in the show, these things naturally arise from the events. It doesn't feel like he spills about the Mad King or develops this relationship with Brienne because the writers needed him to do that at this point. He's whittled down by in-universe things happening to him, and goes through a number of dark, in-universe experiences that bond him to Brienne. The themes, humility and honor in unlikely places, are revealed in an organic way. The characters who happen to be written with this model of storytelling in House of the Dragon Season 3 are Daemon, Ormond, Gwaine, and Ulf, so no wonder they're kind of the standouts. They're the most connected with action. Ormond is a villain who the show isn't particularly invested in psychologically, except to play it for laughs, so he's constantly doing stuff or reacting to stuff. In the same way, the writers don't have a ton to say about Gwaine or Ulf's mental states. By circumstance, they're constantly in motion because they're bouncing between people with more agency than themselves. And because their plots tend to be more action-driven, they feel more meaningful and natural. Other characters are not so fortunate. Criston Cole is the poster child for this show's tendency to half-bake their characters. They were very clearly most interested in Criston's trajectory from nobility to guilt and hypocrisy and then to nihilism. That's why he's reduced to this spiteful anti-Rhaenyra chud by the end of Season 1 and to the middle of Season 2, until he starts going full doomer after seeing dragons in action at Rook's Rest. They were so invested in Cole's mental state that they forgot to showcase him as he ought to exist in-universe, the greatest warrior in the realm. We only get brief moments of Cole's talent for strategy, and very rarely do we ever see his combat skills. We never really get a sympathetic look into the dynamics of class and honor that made him so bitter about Rhaenyra's rejection in the first place. And it's a real shame because the actor, Fabian Frankel, has to keep all of this in his head. But it's the writing that never lets him showcase Cole's full range. In theory, Kristen should be about as sympathetic and dynamic as like Daemon, but no. Then there are the characters who are constantly getting benched, like Corlys. He exists to provoke Rhaenyra or to provoke Alan, because his own mental struggle just isn't as substantive. He's a man of action, so the show doesn't have anything to do for him. He just goes and kills pirates when he's mad, and these pirates, by the way, are doing what, where, and why? I don't know. This is why Daemon and Aemond have to get benched for a season each. The writers won't pace their character development through stuff happening, so just park them in castle therapy until they've deconstructed to the point the writers need them to be at. The development is good in both cases, but it also prevents the writers from having to develop a stronger series of events for them to interact with, which kills the momentum of the whole war. The show also seems to forget its own past because of this. Characters and character history serve the immediate needs of the psychoanalysis, rather than existing as in-universe historical events that always inform what's going on, whether we're drawing attention to it or not. When Larys lectures Aegon about being a terrible person, it's a great scene in an overall very strong character arc. But it comes at the cost of forgetting who and what Larys is. It's really funny when you remember that Larys is the guy who had his dad and brother burned alive by his squad of mute convict hitmen in season 1. The writers have to switch his history off so we can better serve Aegon's narrative for the moment. Rhaena is someone who gets switched on. Her sense of neglect from Daemon is kind of sudden, although we've never really gotten a sense that Daemon's poor parenting has been that much of an issue before. The problem isn't that this conflict exists, it's a reasonable thing, but that it was never properly woven into the show because they didn't need it until they suddenly gave Rhaena more to do. Just in general, other events that really should bear on so many characters right now, like Blood and Cheese, the deaths of Rhaenys, Laenor, and Luke, feel like they never happened unless they're suddenly made relevant before the writers start needing them, so they slip back into obscurity. This inconsistency is poison for a universe where the premise is actions have consequences, and especially a show about a war. It's also really obvious when the show just doesn't have any interest in a character. In Game of Thrones, guys like Adam of Hull, Ironrod, Oscar, and his posse would all have had brief but meaningful scenes that would use a bit of world building or character history to give them a sense of place and depth. In the case of Adam, he's just straight up underused. Ironrod has one big scene that comes out of nowhere, and the Black Commanders exist for hype and aura and no other reason. The greatest victim of all this, though, is the humiliation ritual that is Alicent Hightower's character arc. It got to the point where I was just giggling every time they gave her some more BS to do, because she's kind of the character most defined by actions, but actions that are so divorced from her own characterization or what should be happening that I don't even know. I don't know what they're trying to do with Alicent. Her potential role as Rhaenyra's conscience, they gave that to Massaria. Her role as a schemer was totally removed. Her maternity exists just to serve Aegon and Aemond's arcs. Her willingness to kill her own children might be interesting if they'd remembered any of Westeros' taboos around kinslaying. I have no idea how Olivia Cook gives such a good performance for a character who doesn't act like any human being has ever acted. Actually, maybe the greatest victim isn't Alicent or a character at all. It just might be the war. The show feels like a constant set of stalemates, just punctuated by giant one-off battles. It's hard to get a sense of the campaign or the progression or the raising stakes. And I think because for them, the war is just a backdrop. And for whatever reason, they prefer to psychoanalyze the characters trying to start or stop the war, rather than characters actively experiencing them. Once again, this is why Gwaine and Daemon, characters who get the brunt of the war as active participants, are so compelling. If the show had been about the dance of the dragons and not the mental states of people in the dance, then the structure, pacing, and plot of both seasons 2 and 3 would have been far more solid. All of these are just the main examples I can think of. I'm sure you could do a deep dive into the way this psychological approach pervades the rest of the show on any number of points. Once you see it, it's really hard to unsee it. It's very clear that the writers, just as a group, don't know how to approach the show. And now, we've got one season left. So how does it emerge from the quagmire of its own terrible pacing and messy characterization? The solution would be just remember what genre you're in. Remember you're telling a fictional history through the eyes of in-universe historical figures, meaning that your first concern is what people are doing, so you can build naturalistically on top of that. It's hard to care about this mental health showcase when it feels like the actual matter of the show, a dragon war, is just this backdrop that they're constantly pausing to do a character study. These elements, action and introspection, just aren't balanced. It's like somebody who's constantly they're in therapy for years and they're constantly doing self-help stuff, but they never actually roll out of bed to try anything. The writers and showrunners have just gotten so lost in their own sauce and just so disconnected from what really matters in their own show. I don't really know if they can stick the landing. I really like the show. Despite it all, it's just such an entertaining thing to watch, and I'm going to stick with it till the bitter end. But in my prophetic Helena tapestries, I do foresee a bitter end. That's all. Thanks for watching. God bless.